It was the fourth Christmas Eve since I'd lost my son. I was standing there, in front of his cold headstone, when I suddenly heard it, the sound of a child's laughter cutting through the falling snow, and then I saw the boy. My son's ocean blue eyes and his radiant smile, so painfully vivid on a stranger's face. Tucked in his arm was Captain Barnaby, the teddy bear I'd picked out myself for my son's 5th birthday. And then I saw his mother. The moment our eyes met, her face went as white as a sheet. She snatched the child away as if I were some kind of monster, a mortal threat. What was she running from? Why did my very presence fill her with such terror? My name is Caroline Hayes. I'm 66 years old, from Boston, Massachusetts. If this story touches your heart, you know how this goes. Hit that like button, give it a share, and please, subscribe to the channel so we can continue to share these meaningful life stories together. Your support is truly the wind in our sails. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have a story of your own, don't hesitate to share it. 4 years, 4 Christmases have come and gone without the sound of his laughter. They say time heals all wounds, but for me, it only made the silence in this vast, empty mansion deeper, a silence that had thickened like a layer of permanent ice. Michael, my eldest, was taken from me on a Christmas Eve just like this one, on a snow-covered highway just outside of Boston. The morning news called it a tragic accident, but for a mother, no tragedy is ever a simple accident. It's an event that tears your universe apart, knocks every star from its orbit, and leaves behind a black, gaping hole that nothing can ever fill. The Bentley moved in silence through the streets of Beacon Hill. Outside the window, the city was dressed in its finest. Wreaths hung on brightly painted doors, warm golden light spilled from snow-dusted windows, and the distant sound of church bells echoed in the air, a picture-perfect scene of joy and togetherness. But to me, it was nothing but a cruel mockery. Thomas, the man who's been driving for my family for over 20 years, navigated the heavy traffic with practiced ease, his face a perfect mask of neutrality in the rearview mirror. He knew our destination. He knew my annual ritual. "Shall I wait at the gate for you, Mrs. Hayes?" Thomas's voice was even, breaking the quiet. "No, that won't be necessary, Thomas. Just like always. I'll call when I'm ready," I replied, my gaze still fixed on the world outside. "And thank you." The car pulled up to the wrought iron gates of Mount Auburn Cemetery. This place wasn't like other cemeteries. It was more like an old English garden, with winding paths, still, frozen ponds, and ancient oak trees reaching their bare branches toward the gray sky. I stepped out, and the December chill immediately seeped through my wool coat. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of snow and damp earth. I gave a nod to Henry, the old gatekeeper with a beard as white as the snow around us, and he nodded back. We didn't need words. My presence here on this day had become a familiar part of his routine. The small path had been cleared, but on either side, a pristine white blanket covered everything. The sound of my boots was a stark, lonely crunch against the stone. I walked past the Hayes family plot, where my parents and my husband, William, rested beneath gray marble headstones. Legacy, responsibility, heavy words I had carried on my shoulders my entire life. But no burden could compare to the pain of walking past those graves to get to the newest one, the one that should have been mine first. And there it was, Michael's grave. A slab of polished black marble, simple and elegant, just like he was. Michael William Hayes, 1989 to 2021. A son, a brother, a guiding star. I had chosen those last words, because to me, that's what he was. My North Star, the compass for my life, and for the future of Hayes Maritime. Now, that star had gone out. I knelt, my gloved fingers gently tracing the cold, carved letters. I placed a small sprig of holly on the stone, a symbol of life in the dead of winter, a promise of rebirth I no longer believed in. "I'm here, my love," I whispered, my breath turning into a white plume in the frigid air. "Another Christmas. I wish you could tell me what I'm supposed to do. Ethan is doing well at the company. Maybe too well. He's changed, Michael. Or maybe he never did, and I just couldn't see it." I stood there, lost in my own thoughts, letting the cemetery's stillness envelop me, and that's when I heard it. A sound that was utterly out of place here. Laughter, not a forced or sad chuckle. It was a pure, carefree laugh, the sound of a child who was genuinely happy. It rang out, bright and clear against the falling snow, like an unexpected note in a sad symphony. I startled, turning toward the sound. Not far away, near an old maple tree, I saw a figure. A young woman was sitting on a stone bench, wearing a vibrant blue coat that was a splash of life against the gray and white landscape. And next to her, a little boy was prancing in the snow, chasing the last few drifting flakes. He was wearing a red sweater, like a little flickering flame dancing in the cold. My heart began to beat in a strange, erratic rhythm. There was something about the boy's shape, the way he tilted his head, the dark, curly hair, a familiarity that was almost painful. I squinted, trying to see him more clearly through the hazy veil of snow. The boy stopped, turned to the woman, and said something. And then he smiled. A brilliant, radiant smile that lit up his little face, revealing a charming, crooked tooth on the left side. My world stopped turning. The air caught in my chest. That was Michael's smile. Not a similar smile. It was his smile. The smile I had seen a million times, from the time he was a newborn until his last photo at his 32nd birthday party. The smile that could chase away any gloom. The smile that had once been the sun in my life. I started walking, like a sleepwalker, my feet moving without any conscious command from my brain. I had to get closer. I had to be sure I wasn't hallucinating, that my grief wasn't playing some cruel trick on my mind. As I drew nearer, the details sharpened, and each one was another hammer blow to my already shattered heart. The deep blue eyes, the exact color of the Atlantic on a winter's day, the way he furrowed his brow in concentration at a snowflake on his mitten, it was all Michael. And then, I saw what he was clutching in his arms. A worn-out teddy bear, dressed in a little blue sea, captain's uniform with a cap askew. Its fur was threadbare in places, and one of its plastic eyes was slightly scuffed. Captain Barnaby. The 5th birthday present I had scoured every toy store in Boston to find for Michael. I remembered that day like it was yesterday, how he'd hugged that bear and declared that when he grew up, he'd be a great captain just like Barnaby. That bear had been on his bed through his entire childhood, and later, it sat proudly on a bookshelf in his Harvard dorm room. It can't be, I whispered to myself, a choked sound escaping my throat. The boy seemed to hear me. He looked up, his eyes wide and clear, without a trace of fear. "Hi," he said, his voice high and bright. The woman, whose presence I had all but forgotten in those stunning few seconds, whipped her head around. She had thick, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and a pretty face marked by a hint of exhaustion and worry. When her eyes met mine, a horrifying transformation took place. Every bit of color drained from her face. Her eyes flew open wide, not in surprise, but in pure, unadulterated terror, as if she had just seen a ghost. Recognition flashed in her eyes, an unmistakable recognition. She knew who I was. "Noah," she called out, her voice sharp, almost a hiss. "Come to Mommy, now." She shot to her feet, grabbing the boy's hand. The boy, Noah, looked at his mother in confusion, then back at me. "But Mommy," he said, "I was talking to the lady. We have to go. Right. Now," she insisted, her voice trembling uncontrollably. She couldn't even look at me anymore. Her eyes darted around, searching for the nearest exit like a cornered animal. I finally found my voice, though it was hoarse and sounded alien to my own ears. "Please, wait." I took another step toward them. The woman took a corresponding step back, pulling Noah tightly against her in a fiercely protective gesture. "The boy," I started, but I didn't know what to say. He has my son's smile." The woman squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, as if my words were a physical blow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We really have to go." She bent down and scooped Noah into her arms, despite his protests. Captain Barnaby slipped from his grasp and fell into the snow. Without a second thought, she snatched the bear up with her other hand and started walking, almost running, toward the main gate. "Wait," I called after them, my voice now laced with desperation. "Please, what's your name?" She didn't answer. She just walked faster, her dark hair flying in the cold wind. Noah, looking over his mother's shoulder, turned back to me. He gave a small, innocent wave. "Bye-bye, lady." His voice drifted back, growing fainter. And then they were gone, disappearing behind a row of snow-covered cedars. I stood there, alone in the cemetery. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. The familiar silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with a million unanswered questions. Who was that woman? Why was she so terrified of me? And the most important question, the one screaming in my mind, how could there be a little boy with Michael's face, Michael's smile, clutching Michael's most beloved toy? I looked down at their tracks in the snow, the tiny footprints of a child next to the hurried, desperate strides of a woman in flight. Fleeing from what? Or, fleeing from whom? The ride from Mount Auburn back to Beacon Hill was the quietest I'd ever experienced in the Bentley. The silence didn't come from peace, but from the raging storm inside my head, a tornado of questions, images, and a feeling that was equal parts hope and pure terror. The image of the little boy, Noah, with Michael's smile and Captain Barnaby in his arms, was seared into my retinas, playing on a loop. So was the image of the young woman's face, drained of all color. That fear wasn't the confusion of a stranger being approached. It was the terror of someone recognizing a mortal danger. And that danger, somehow, was me. "Straight home, ma'am?" Thomas's voice gently pulled me from the chaos in my mind. I looked out the window. The Christmas lights twinkling on Newberry Street looked alien, like they belonged to another world, one I was no longer a part of. The empty house was waiting for me, with its vast rooms full of memories and silence. No, I couldn't go back there, not yet. "No, Thomas. Take me to the office at Long Wharf," I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have some things to take care of." Thomas didn't ask a single question. He just gave a slight nod and turned the car toward the harbor. He'd worked for my family long enough to recognize the shift in my tone. That wasn't the voice of his grieving employer. It was the voice of the chairwoman of the board of Hayes Maritime, preparing for a fight. My office took up a corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic view of the Boston harbor. On a clear day, you could see our massive container ships moving slowly into port, diligent ants in the empire my husband and I had built from the ground up. But tonight, the water was just a black void, glittering with the cold, reflected lights of the city. This was my fortress, the one place I could think clearly, away from the emotions that were drowning me. I sat down in the leather chair behind William's old mahogany desk. My hand slid across the cool wood, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt more than just the pain of loss. I felt a fire rekindling in my veins, a purpose. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Eleanor Portman, my personal lawyer and a discreet family friend, answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, it's Caroline. Merry Christmas," I said, skipping the usual pleasantries. "Caroline, you too. Is everything all right? You sound. I need you to do something for me. This is to be kept in the strictest confidence, Eleanor, just between you and me." I paused, taking a deep breath. "I need you to find me every piece of information you can on a woman named Sophia Rossi. I don't have much, probably in her early 30s, and she has a son, about 4 years old, named Noah. I think they might be living in the North End." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor was smart enough not to ask why. "What kind of information, Caroline?" "Everything. Address, occupation, financial situation, anything you can find legally and quickly. I need it by morning." "I understand." "I'm on it," she replied, her voice all business. "I'll email you as soon as I have something." After I hung up, I sat there in the dark office, staring out at the harbor lights. A new fleet of ships, the Michael Hayes class of icebreakers, was being prepped for its maiden voyage north. Michael had spent the last 2 years of his life overseeing that project. It was his pride and joy. Now, Ethan was managing it. The next morning, as I was sipping my second cup of coffee in the silent breakfast room, my iPad chimed. The email from Eleanor had arrived. I opened it, my heart pounding. The file was clear. Sophia Rossi, 33 years old, a freelance landscape designer, a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design with a master's degree. Currently living in a rented apartment on Hanover Street, in the North End. Her financials painted a picture of a constant struggle, significant student loan debt, maxed out credit cards, and virtually no savings. Eleanor had also found one glaring detail: an emergency room bill from Massachusetts General Hospital from 6 months ago for Noah Rossi, diagnosis listed as a severe asthma attack. Nothing in this file screamed professional grifter. No hidden assets, no shady connections, just the portrait of a single mother doing everything she could to get by, and a child who was suffering in an unhealthy environment. My resolve hardened. I knew what I had to do. I had Thomas drive me to the North End that afternoon, not in the Bentley, but in a more discreet Lincoln sedan. The neighborhood was a charming maze of cobblestone streets and tightly packed brick buildings, full of old-world character. But once I stepped inside Sophia's building, that charm vanished. The stairs were narrow and steep, the air was thick with the smell of garlic and tomato sauce, and the runner on the hallway floor was worn down to the backing. I stood before apartment 4B and took a deep breath before knocking. It took a long moment for anyone to answer. The door opened hesitantly, and there stood Sophia Rossi, her face even paler than it had been the day before. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her dark hair in a messy bun. "Mrs. Hayes," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. How did you find me?" "Hello, Sophia," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I think we need to talk. May I come in?" She looked like she wanted to slam the door in my face, but something in my eyes must have stopped her. She hesitated for a second, then stepped back, letting me in. The apartment was just as small as I'd imagined. A living room that bled into a kitchenette with minimal worn furniture, but everything was impressively neat and clean. A child's crayon drawings were taped all over the refrigerator. On a small desk, a stack of landscape design books sat next to a pile of unpaid bills. The air in the room felt damp and heavy. I don't know what to say to you," Sophia began, wringing her hands. "Let's start with why you ran from me yesterday," I said, looking her directly in the eye. She flinched, her gaze darting away. I was startled. It was more than surprise, Sophia. It was fear. "You're afraid of me, why?" Before she could answer, a small voice called out from the bedroom, "Mommy?" And then Noah walked out, still clutching Captain Barnaby. He was rubbing his eyes, his hair mussed from a nap. When he saw me, his face lit up, completely without fear. "Hey, it's the park lady," he chirped. "Did you come to play with Captain Barnaby?" He ran over to me, tilting that face, Michael's face, up at me. My heart clenched. I knelt down to his level. "Hello, Noah. It's so good to see you again. And Captain Barnaby, too. He looks as brave as ever." Noah giggled, and that smile, again, was a knife to the heart. His innocent reaction seemed to break through some of Sophia's defenses. She watched us, a complex expression of anxiety and maybe a flicker of longing on her face. Suddenly, Noah started to cough. It was a dry, hacking cough, followed by a faint wheezing sound. It wasn't a full-blown attack, but it was a clear warning sign. Sophia sprang into action. She rushed to a drawer, pulled out an inhaler, and quickly administered 2 puffs. "Slow breath, sweetie, remember?" she said, her voice a practiced mix of calm and controlled panic. I stood there, taking it all in, the poverty, the fierce maternal love, and the fragility of this grandson I had only just found. When Noah's breathing had evened out and he'd gone back to his toy cars, I turned to Sophia. My tone was no longer questioning. It was certain. "This apartment isn't good for his health," I stated, not as a question. "The humidity is too high. Mass General is a fine hospital, but I imagine you don't want to be back in their ER anytime soon." Sophia started when I mentioned the hospital. She realized I knew more than she thought. "I'm doing the best I can," she said, a defensive edge to her voice. "I know you are," I replied, "but sometimes the best we can do isn't enough, especially when there's another option." I paused, letting my words sink in. "I have a guest house on my property in Beacon Hill. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, with a large garden. The air is clean. It would be better for Noah's lungs." She stared at me, the wariness and fear flooding back into her eyes. "I can't accept your charity." "This isn't charity, Sophia," I said, my voice hardening just a little. "This is a practical arrangement, a solution to an urgent problem, his health. And it gives me a chance to be near my grandson." I'd said it, the plain truth. "He is Michael's son, isn't he?" She didn't answer, but tears began to stream down her cheeks. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. "Think about Noah, Sophia," I said, softening my tone. "Not about me, not about your fears. Think about him." Finally, after a long, tense silence, She gave a tiny, defeated nod. A nod of surrender. Only for Noah, she whispered. The move was astonishingly fast. Their entire life fit into 5 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases, which slid easily into the trunk of the Lincoln. As we drove through the iron gates of the Hayes estate, I heard Sophia's quiet gasp. The main house came into view, grand and a little intimidating in the late afternoon light. But I directed Thomas toward the guest house, a charming cottage tucked away behind an English-style garden. It was cozy and well-appointed. I'd had it cleaned and prepared that morning. The refrigerator was stocked, fresh, fluffy towels were folded in the bathroom, and in the second bedroom, a child's bed with ship-patterned sheets was waiting. I had even placed a few new toys and a small bookshelf filled with classic children's stories inside. Sophia walked from room to room like someone in a dream, her hand lightly touching the granite countertops, the wooden window frames. It's too much," she whispered. Noah was the complete opposite. He squealed with delight, ran through every room, and finally came to a stop at the large window overlooking the garden. "Mommy, look, there's room for Captain Barnaby to go exploring." I left them to get settled. When I walked back to the main house, the warmth I'd felt in the cottage evaporated, replaced by the familiar chill. And there, in the living room, stood my other son. Ethan was waiting for me. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored Brioni suit, and he smiled at me, a smile he had practiced to perfection. "Mother," he said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "I've been calling you all afternoon. Where have you been?" "I had a personal matter to attend to," I replied, taking off my coat. Ethan's gaze drifted past me, toward the lit windows of the guest house. A barely perceptible frown creased his forehead. "Do we have company?" I decided not to beat around the bush. "That's Sophia Rossi and her son Noah. They'll be staying here for a while." The surprise on Ethan's face was genuine, but it was quickly masked by a look of feigned concern. "Rossi? You mean the woman you ran into at the cemetery? You found them?" "I did." He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Mother, I know you're lonely. I know how difficult a day this is. But you have to be careful. You've invited complete strangers into our home. A woman who just happens to show up with a child who looks like Michael after 4 years? Doesn't that strike you as a little too convenient?" He said the word convenient, as if it were dirty. "Mother," he continued, placing a hand on my shoulder, "this is a classic gold-digging scheme. She's preying on your grief. I'm worried about you. I don't want to see you get hurt again." I looked directly into his eyes. I'd looked into those eyes for 38 years. I'd seen joy in them, anger, disappointment. But tonight, behind that mask of concern, I saw something else. Something cold, hard, and utterly foreign. It wasn't worry for me. It was fury. A perfectly concealed fury at the arrival of an unwanted heir. "Thank you for your concern, Ethan," I said, gently removing his hand from my shoulder, "but I know what I'm doing." I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving him standing alone in the grand empty living room. The first morning with the sound of a child's laughter in the garden at the Hayes estate was a strange experience. I sat in the breakfast room, nursing a cup of Earl Grey. I wasn't really drinking, and listened to Noah's shrieks of joy as he chased a squirrel across the lawn. The sound was both a healing balm, filling the empty spaces Michael had left behind, and a constant twisting knife in an old wound. Every one of Noah's giggles was a reminder of what I had lost. But now, it was also a reminder of what I had to protect. The presence of Sophia and Noah had completely altered the dynamic of the house. Sophia remained timid, trying to keep herself and Noah almost invisible, sticking to the guest house or the back garden. But Noah was different. He had a boundless curiosity and a natural confidence. He would often wander into the main house, finding me in the library or my home office, holding up a crayon drawing of a ship or an interesting rock he'd found. He called me Grandma Caroline, and every time I heard it, another piece of my frozen heart thawed. Ethan, on the other hand, played the part of the perfect uncle with an unsettling perfection. He bought Noah the most expensive toys, a remote-controlled fire engine, a complex model battleship that no 4-year-old could possibly assemble. He treated Sophia with a cool, detached politeness, always asking if she needed anything, but in a way that made her feel more like a servant than a guest. He was watching them, and he wanted me to know it. I knew I didn't have much time. Ethan's patience had its limits. I needed to act fast, and above all, I needed to be discreet. I couldn't use the resources of Hayes Maritime. Ethan had eyes and ears everywhere. I couldn't hire a private investigator. They were too easily bought or traced. I needed someone I could trust implicitly, someone with the skills to dive deep into murky financial waters, and someone whose loyalty was unshakable not to the current regime, but to William's legacy. There was only one person who fit that bill. I found George Sterling's number in an old address book. George had been the chief financial officer of Hayes Maritime for 30 years, a small, stern Scotsman with an accounting mind like a razor blade. He had retired 2 years before Michael's death, after his wife passed away. He had weathered every storm with William and me, from the oil crisis in the 70s to the market crash of 2008. His loyalty belonged to the old guard, not to Ethan's new leadership. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew Ethan was tied up in meetings downtown. "George," I said when he answered, "it's Caroline Hayes." "Caroline, what a pleasant surprise. Are you keeping well?" His Scottish burr was still there, even after more than 40 years in the States. "I'm all right, George. Thank you. I was wondering if you might have a moment. I need your advice on a matter that's a bit delicate." "For you, Caroline, I always have time. Is something wrong? You sound different." We arranged to meet the next day at the Boston Athenaeum, a stately old private library near my office. It was quiet, formal, and full of secluded corners, the perfect place for a secret conversation. We sat in a reading room on the 5th floor, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling oak shelves filled with old, leather-bound books. George looked older than when I'd last seen him. His silver hair was thinner, and there were more lines around his sharp eyes. But his gaze was as piercing as ever. "So, what's this delicate matter that's pulled an old man away from his roses?" he asked, a slight smile playing on his lips. I didn't waste time with small talk. I told him everything: the encounter at the cemetery, Noah, Sophia's fear, and Ethan's strange behavior. I didn't make any accusations. I just laid out the facts as they were. George listened intently, his hands clasped on the table. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the rooftops of Beacon Hill. "When a fox starts acting strangely," he finally said, his voice thoughtful, "it's usually because it's trying to protect something in its den." He turned back to me. "What do you want me to find, Caroline?" "I want you to look at the books," I said, lowering my voice. "Not as an auditor. As George Sterling. I need your eyes, the ones that helped William build this company. Look at the last 5 years. See if there are any unusual transactions, any expenditures that don't make sense. Find the fox's den, George." He nodded slowly. "That will require access. Ethan will never approve it." "He won't know," I replied. "You still have server access as the chairwoman, don't you?" "I am still the chair of the board." "That'll do. Send me your login credentials. I'll work from home. There won't be any trail leading back to the office." The wait that followed was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Every day, I had to play the part of the happy grandmother, the trusting mother, while inside, a storm of suspicion and anxiety raged. I played with Noah in the garden, read him stories, and saw Michael in his every gesture. It gave me strength. Ethan continued his own performance. He even suggested throwing a small party to welcome Noah to the family. I gently declined, saying the boy needed time to adjust. The disappointment that flashed across his face was there for only a second, but I saw it. He wanted to bring Sophia and Noah into the light, to control the narrative, to make them part of his plan. A week later, George called. His voice was no longer calm. "We need to meet, Caroline. Immediately. Same place." This time, when I met him at the Athenaeum, there were no pleasantries. He placed a slim leather briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were a few printed pages. "I think I've found the den," he said, his voice grim, "and it's much deeper than we thought." He slid a paper toward me. It was a spreadsheet. "These 3 companies," he said, pointing to 3 names. "Orion Logistics, Poseidon Holdings, Triton Global, all registered in Delaware, all established within the last 5 years. "Vendors?" I asked. "I've never heard of them." "Exactly," George replied. "Because they don't really exist. They're shell corporations. Over the past 4 years, Hayes Maritime has paid these 3 companies a grand total of $28 million. The number hung in the air between us. 28 million. That wasn't an accounting error. That was a systematic plunder. "How is that possible?" I whispered, feeling my chest tighten. "Any major payment requires board approval." "Most," George corrected. He flipped to another page. "This is a copy of the bylaw amendment we passed in 2015, after William died. Article 7B. It gives the CEO Ethan the authority to unilaterally approve vendor contracts and payments up to $5 million per transaction without board oversight, as long as it falls within the approved operating budget." I remembered the article. It was meant to create flexibility, to allow the company to react faster to market opportunities. We had trusted the person in that chair. We had trusted Ethan. "He broke up the payments," I said, the horrifying truth dawning on me. "Always just under the $5 million threshold." George nodded. "Clever, methodical, and every invoice, every payment order has his signature on it." I stared at the numbers on the page, but in my mind, I saw only one thing. Michael, with his meticulous nature and his unwavering integrity, would never have missed these transactions. He was the executive vice president. He would have seen the reports. He would have asked questions. He would have found out. The question I had asked myself in the cemetery, did Michael know, now had an answer. A cold, terrifying answer. He didn't just know. He must have confronted his brother. And perhaps that very integrity had cost him his life. I looked up at George, and I knew he was thinking the exact same thing. His face was a mask of grief. "Caroline," he began, his voice faltering. I know what you think, George," I interrupted, my voice as cold as ice. "And you're right, this isn't about money anymore." I gathered the papers, folded them carefully, and placed them in my handbag. The truth George Sterling had uncovered was a physical weight on my chest. $28 million. That number wasn't just embezzlement, it was an indictment, a testament to Ethan's bottomless greed and sickening betrayal. Every day, I had to live with this horrifying knowledge, to face Ethan at the breakfast table, to smile at his phony inquiries, while the same question played over and over in my head. "What did you do to your brother?" I tried to hide the change in me, burying the rage and horror beneath a calm exterior, but I knew Ethan was perceptive. He could sense the chill in my voice, the distance in my eyes. He became more watchful, his spontaneous visits to the guest house more frequent, his gifts for Noah more extravagant, as if he were trying to buy the loyalty of a 4-year-old while simultaneously sending a message to me and Sophia, a message of power and control. As Christmas approached, a sense of foreboding settled over the house. 4 years ago, it was this very season that tragedy had struck, and now, as the holly and wreaths went up again, I felt no holiday cheer. I only felt a cold premonition. It was Ethan again who suggested a family Christmas party. "Just us," he'd said over dinner, his voice full of false sincerity. "You, me, Sophia, and Noah. It's time we truly became a family. Time to make new, happier memories." Every nerve in my body screamed in protest, but I knew that refusing would only heighten his suspicion. Besides, a part of me wanted Noah to have a real Christmas, one with a tree, presents, and a sense of warmth, things he may never have had. "That's a lovely idea, Ethan," I replied, forcing a smile. And so, the stage was set for another tragedy. On Christmas Eve, the snow fell thick and heavy outside, blanketing Beacon Hill in a pristine layer of white. But inside, the fire in the living room crackled merrily, casting a warm glow on the enormous Christmas tree that Noah and I had decorated together. Noah, dressed in a pair of red-striped pajamas, was running in circles, absolutely beside himself with excitement. To him, this was a wonderland. He'd never seen a tree so big, nor so many brightly wrapped presents. Sophia, though she tried to be cheerful for her son, looked tense. She wore a simple wool dress and kept glancing toward Ethan, as if expecting him to do something. Ethan, in contrast, was the picture of charm and hospitality. He poured wine for me, mixed a non-alcoholic cocktail for Sophia, and even got down on the floor to play with Noah. He was the perfect uncle, the perfect son, the perfect host. It was a masterful performance. "All right, time for presents," Ethan announced after dinner, clapping his hands to get Noah's attention. Noah cheered and scrambled for the pile of gifts. Ethan had bought him a gigantic electric train set, a gift that was far too big, too ostentatious. But Noah didn't care. His eyes were shining. As Ethan and Sophia were struggling to assemble the first few pieces of track, One of the small plastic balls from the set rolled away, across the Persian rug and toward the glass door leading to the indoor pool area. "My ball!" Noah cried and toddled after it. I was about to get up and call him back, but Ethan spoke first, his voice still cheerful. "Let him go, Mother. He's just excited." The pool area was an extension William had built, with glass walls and a glass dome roof, giving the feeling of swimming outdoors even in the dead of winter. For safety, especially when Michael and Ethan were young, it was fitted with a state-of-the-art security lock. The door could only be opened with a keycard or a numerical code that only Ethan and I knew. It was always locked, always. Noah ran to the glass door. I saw him stop, his small hand pressed against the cool glass, looking at the blue water, which was gently illuminated. And then, everything went dark. Not just a flicker. All the lights in the house went out, including the lights on the Christmas tree, and even the glow from the fireplace seemed to be swallowed by the blackness. A sudden, heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling outside. "A power outage?" Sophia asked, her voice tight with nerves in the dark. "Must be the snowstorm. I'll go check the breaker," Ethan's voice called out, unnervingly calm. 10 seconds. Maybe it was only 10 seconds that passed, but it felt like an eternity. 10 seconds of darkness and unnatural quiet. And then I heard it, a loud, echoing splash from the direction of the pool, the sickening, unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the water. Immediately after, the lights flickered back on, as brightly and suddenly as they had gone out. It took a second for my eyes to adjust. I looked toward Ethan. He was standing just a few feet from the circuit breaker box. I looked at Sophia. Her face was ashen, and then we both looked at the pool door. The door was wide open, and Noah was gone. "No!" Sophia shrieked, a gut-wrenching scream of pure horror. She bolted toward the pool. I ran after her, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Everything seemed to move in nightmarish slow motion. When we reached the door, the sight before me will be forever burned into my memory. Noah was in the deep end of the pool, where his feet couldn't touch the bottom. He was flailing, his small arms slapping uselessly at the water, his face bobbing in and out of sight. His red pajamas were waterlogged, pulling him down. "Oh God!" I heard Ethan yell from behind us. But I had no time to think. I was about to dive in, clothes and all, when a figure shot past me. Ethan, in his expensive suit, dove cleanly into the water without a moment's hesitation. He swam the few strokes it took to reach Noah and pulled his head above the surface, just as he was about to go under for good. Sophia was at the edge of the pool, sobbing, her hands outstretched. Ethan lifted Noah, who was coughing and crying, out of the water and into his mother's arms. It's okay, my baby," Sophia wept, clutching Noah, who was shivering from cold and fright. "Mommy's here." Ethan climbed out of the pool, water streaming from his clothes and hair. He was breathing heavily, playing the part of the hero. "The gate," he said, pointing to the open door. "The power outage must have shorted out the electronic lock. He must have slipped in during the blackout." His explanation was plausible. Too plausible. But as I helped Sophia wrap Noah in a towel, my eyes were fixed on the security panel next to the door. It was a newer model, equipped with a battery backup. It shouldn't have been affected by a 10-second outage, and on the panel, a small green LED light was glowing. Green for unlocked. Not system error, not power failure. It meant the gate had been deliberately unlocked, either with the keycard or the code. I looked up and met Ethan's eyes. He was wringing out his suit jacket, avoiding my gaze, but I had seen it. For the briefest of moments, before he could mask it, I had seen a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. A cold, successful glint. He hadn't saved Noah. He had tried to drown him. The darkness, the power failure, the rolling ball. It was all a carefully calculated plan. He had tried to kill my grandson, or at the very least, he had sent me a cruel and unmistakable warning, a message that he could get to Noah whenever he wanted, that he could take everything from me, all over again. That night, after Noah was safely asleep, sedated by a mild dose from our family doctor, and Ethan had gone to change, I stood alone by the pool. The house was quiet again. The Christmas tree still sparkled, the presents lay unopened, but the spirit of Christmas had vanished, replaced by a cold, horrifying certainty. I no longer had any doubt. Ethan wasn't just a thief, he was a monster. a monster living under my own roof, with my grandson. That horrific Christmas Eve didn't end with church bells or carols. It ended in a dead silence, a quiet more terrifying than any scream. After the family doctor had come and gone, after Noah had finally drifted into a fitful sleep in his mother's arms, the house fell into a strange, suspended state. The Christmas tree glittered mindlessly. The unopened presents lay like mute insults to a joy that had been murdered. On the expensive Persian rug, a dark, spreading water stain had yet to dry, a physical reminder of the moment I knew would be forever seared into my mind. Ethan had disappeared to his room after playing the hero, leaving me alone in the vast living room. I didn't turn on any more lights. I sat in the leather armchair facing the fireplace, where the last of the embers glowed like dying eyes in the dark. The chill in the room wasn't coming from outside. It was radiating from my own heart, a cold, sharp-edged certainty. It was not an accident. The words repeated in my head, not as a theory, but as an undeniable fact: the power outage, the gate being unlocked by the code. Ethan's perfectly timed, perfectly executed rescue. It was all a cruelly staged play. It wasn't just a warning, it was a demonstration of power. He wanted to show me he could touch Noah at any time, that the safety I was trying to provide was an illusion. He wanted me to be afraid, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had misjudged his prey. He thought he was dealing with a grief-stricken, fragile old woman. He didn't realize that his actions hadn't sown fear. They had awakened something far more dangerous: the fury of a cornered mother. The loss of Michael had paralyzed me for 4 years. But the threat to Noah, my grandson, Michael's blood, had the opposite effect. It had shocked me back to life. How long I sat there, I don't know. An hour, maybe 3. Time had lost its meaning. Finally, I stood up, my body stiff from the tension. I didn't go up to my bedroom. Instead, I walked to my home office, where I could view the security monitors. I brought up the feed from the cameras around the guest house. The grainy, black and white image showed a quiet exterior, but I knew that inside, another soul was just as shattered as mine. I had to talk to Sophia. I needed to know everything. Her fear was no longer an obstacle. It was a crucial piece of the puzzle, and I needed it to see the whole, monstrous picture. I pulled on a thick wool robe and stepped outside. The frigid air hit my face like a slap. The snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a silent, white world under a hazy moon. The crunch of my feet on the fresh snow was the only sound to break the stillness. As I approached the guest house, I saw a dim light on in the living room window. She was still awake. I didn't knock. I gently turned the handle. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. Sophia was sitting on the sofa, huddled under a blanket, her eyes staring into space. She didn't even startle when I entered. She looked exhausted, broken, like a doll left out in a storm. A cup of cold tea sat on the coffee table beside her. "You should be sleeping," I said softly, my voice raspier than usual. She turned her head, her eyes swollen and red from crying. "I can't," she whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him, under the water." I walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her. "He's safe now. He's sleeping. The doctor said he'll be fine." "Safe?" She let out a bitter laugh, a sound completely devoid of humor. "No one is safe here, Mrs. Hayes. I was a fool to ever think we could be." "It wasn't an accident, Sophia," I said directly, done with circling the issue. "We both know it." My words hit her like a physical blow. She flinched, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "Please, don't say that. He might hear you." "He's asleep in the main house," I said, my voice cold. "But his presence is everywhere, isn't it? That's what you've been afraid of all this time. Not me, him." Tears started to well up in her eyes again. She didn't speak, just nodded desperately. "I need you to tell me everything, Sophia," I pressed on, my voice a mix of urgency and steel. "Why you ran, what Michael told you, your fear, your secret. It's putting Noah in danger. Your silence isn't protecting him anymore. It's making him a target. Do you understand?" "You don't understand," she sobbed. "You can't possibly." "Then help me understand." My voice rose, my patience wearing thin. I got up and moved toward her, kneeling on the rug in front of her. I took her cold hands in mine. "Look at me, Sophia. I am his grandmother. I love him, just like you do. Tonight, the man in that house tried to harm my only grandson, my son's only child. I will not let that happen again, but I cannot fight him in the dark. I need the truth. I need ammunition, and you are the only one who has it. I looked deep into her tear-filled eyes, trying to will some of my own strength, my own rage, into her. The time for running is over, Sophia. The time for hiding is over. Now, it's time to fight. She stared at me for a long moment, fear and indecision warring on her face, and then, something broke. The wall of fear she had built around herself for 4 years finally crumbled. She took a deep, shuddering breath and began to speak. "It wasn't what you think," she began, her voice still shaky but clearer. "My relationship with Michael, we were very careful. He knew his position, the expectations his family had for him. He didn't want to disappoint you." She told me how they'd met, not at some glitzy charity ball, but at a landscape design expo where she was working part-time as a guide. Michael had been there, not as the heir to Hayes Maritime, but just as a man who loved gardens and was drawn to her passion. They had talked for hours about plant species, about how light changes a space, about her dream of creating public parks for underprivileged neighborhoods. He was different, she said, a sad smile touching her lips. He listened. He really listened. With him, I didn't feel like some poor girl trying to pay off her student loans. I just felt seen. Their love affair had blossomed in secret. Dates in little-known cafes, long walks in Franklin Park, nights spent in her tiny apartment, cooking together and dreaming of a simple future. A future with a small house and a garden, far from the world of boardrooms and container ships. "When I found out I was pregnant," she continued, her voice breaking, "I was terrified. I thought I would lose him. But Michael, he was so happy, the happiest I'd ever seen him. He said it was a sign, that it was time to stop hiding. He said he was going to talk to you. He had a plan. He was going to introduce me, and our child, the right way." But then, things started to change. In the last few months of his life, Michael became distant and stressed. There were late nights at the office, hushed phone calls, and a constant worry in his eyes. He said there was trouble at the company, Sophia recounted. He wouldn't give me details, just that he'd discovered some inconsistencies in the books. He said he was investigating. I could feel the tension between him and Ethan growing. They would argue on calls he thought I couldn't hear. And then, she told me about the last night. That fateful Christmas Eve. He came to my apartment very late, around midnight, she recalled, her eyes looking far away, as if reliving the moment. He looked exhausted and scared. I had never seen him scared before. He was so pale, and his hands were ice cold. He had held her for a long time. He told her he'd figured it all out, that the problem was much worse than he'd thought. "It's not just about the money, Soph. He's rotten to the core. There's a darkness in him I never saw before," she quoted, her voice trembling with the memory. "He said he was going to confront Ethan one last time, to give him a chance to confess to you before he brought all the evidence to light." I held my breath. Every cell in my body was tense, waiting for the next words. "Before he left," Sophia said, the tears flowing freely now, "he took my hands. He looked me right in the eye, and his gaze, I will never forget it. It was so urgent. He said, 'Listen to me, Sophia. Listen very carefully. I have to do this. But if anything happens to me, I need you to promise me something.'" She paused, swallowing hard. "Promise me you'll disappear. You take our baby and you run as far as you can. Don't go to my mother. Don't call the police. Don't trust anyone in my family, especially Ethan. You have to understand, he won't stop. He will hunt you down. He will try to erase any trace of you and our son, because to him, our baby is a threat. Promise me, Sophia. Promise me you will protect our child." Sophia's story ended in a choked sob. The room fell silent, filled only with the sound of her weeping and the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears. Now I understood. All of it. The flight from the cemetery. The 4 years of silence. The terror in her eyes. Michael hadn't just warned her about Ethan. He had warned her about me. Perhaps he feared I would be too blinded by my love for my remaining son to believe her. Or perhaps he feared Ethan would manipulate me, turn me into a weapon against her. My own son had lost faith in his mother to protect the woman he loved and their unborn child. That truth was a deeper, more painful betrayal than even Ethan's. The rage inside me, the cold, sharp fury, was now mixed with a profound and aching grief and regret. I had been so lost in my own pain that I had failed to see the truth right in front of me. I had let a monster flourish in my own home, while this woman had fought alone to protect the last living piece of Michael. I reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "You kept your promise," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. "You protected him. You have been so brave, Sophia." She looked up at me, a fragile flicker of hope in her exhausted eyes. "So, you believe me?" "Believe you?" I replied, a bitter smile on my lips. "Sophia, you've just given me the one thing I've been searching for 4 years. You've given me the truth. You've given Michael a voice from beyond the grave." I stood up, a feeling of cold clarity spreading through me. The pain was still there, deep and indelible, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was now fuel. "Now, it's my turn to keep a promise," I said, looking out the window toward the main house where my son was sleeping. "I promise to protect Michael's legacy, and Noah is that legacy. I will not let anyone or anything harm him ever again." The mother in me was still weeping for the son I had lost, but the queen, the one who had built an empire with her husband, the one who had faced down the most ruthless competitors in the world, she was awake now. The dawn after Christmas broke quiet and cruel. The first weak, gray light of day crept through the windows of the guest house, illuminating a scene of utter exhaustion. Sophia had finally fallen asleep on the sofa, curled under the blanket, her face stained with dried tears and a weariness that seemed to have settled deep into her bones. Noah was still sleeping soundly in his room, his even breathing the only peaceful sound in a world that had just been torn apart. I hadn't slept a wink. I had sat in the armchair across from Sophia all night, keeping watch, not against any physical threat, but as if to guard the fractured pieces of my family from shattering completely into the darkness. I listened to every creak of the house, watched every shifting shadow outside the window. Every sound was a potential enemy. Every shadow was the shape of Ethan. As the daylight grew stronger, Sophia stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a panicked moment, she looked around the unfamiliar room before the memory of the horrific night came rushing back. She sat up abruptly, her eyes finding mine. "Noah," she began, her voice a raw whisper. "He's still sleeping," I reassured her. "The doctor said a deep sleep is the best thing for him right now." She nodded, but the tension didn't leave her face. Fear had become a part of her, like her eye color or the shade of her hair, but now, mixed in with that fear, was something else, a reliance, a fragile hope that she was no longer fighting alone. "What do we do now?" she asked, a simple question that held the weight of an entire, uncertain future. I stood up and walked to the window, looking toward the main house where my son, his brother's murderer, was likely just waking up, ready to start a new day, as if nothing had happened. "You," I said, turning back to her, "are going to do what you've always done. You are going to take care of Noah. You are going to keep him safe and happy. You are going to act as normal as you possibly can. That is the hardest job, and it is the most important one right now. And you?" A cold smile, devoid of any warmth, touched my lips. "I'm going hunting." I left the guest house as the sun climbed a little higher, leaving Sophia with a silent promise that I would return with a plan. When I entered the main house, the smell of coffee and toast hung in the air. Martha, our housekeeper, was tidying up in the kitchen. It was all so absurdly normal, and then Ethan came down the stairs, looking as fresh as a morning flower. He was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of Michael's eyes, ocean blue, and he smiled at me. "Good morning, Mother," he said, his tone cheerful. "Did you sleep well? Last night was an unfortunate incident. I had the pool's security system checked. It seems the battery backup unit was faulty. I'm having it replaced today." He lied so smoothly, without a flicker of hesitation. He had his cover story ready, a plausible explanation to paper over his monstrous act. He looked at me, waiting for a reaction, for relief, for thanks for saving his nephew. I just looked at him. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds. I wanted him to feel the shift. "Thank you for taking care of it," I finally said, my voice flat, emotionless. "Make sure it never happens again." I walked past him, giving him no opportunity to say more. I could feel his eyes on my back as I went into my home office and shut the door. The game had begun. I sat behind my desk, but my mind was elsewhere. It was on a battlefield. The first step in any war is to know your enemy and choose your terrain wisely. Go to the police? That's the first thought any normal person would have. But I was no longer a normal person, and Ethan was certainly no common criminal. What was my evidence? The testimony of Sophia, a woman with no standing, living on my charity? The word of a woman he could easily paint as unstable or opportunistic? The accident at the pool, with its neat explanation of a technical failure? No, Ethan had had 4 years to cover his tracks. He had built a fortress of money, power, and a respectable facade. A police investigation would only alert him, give him time to destroy any remaining evidence, to silence any potential witnesses. And worse, it would put Sophia and Noah in even greater danger. He would act out of desperation, and a desperate animal is the most dangerous kind. No, the battlefield could not be a criminal courtroom, not yet. The battlefield had to be a place where I had the advantage, where I knew the terrain, where I held the rules, where I was the queen. Hayes Maritime. The company was his source of power. It was his armor. It was his weapon, and I would turn it into the very instrument of his destruction. I wouldn't attack the crime of murder head on. I would attack its foundation, the financial crimes. I would strip away his armor, piece by piece, until the monster inside was left bare for all the world to see. But to do that, I needed an ally, someone not just smart, but utterly loyal, someone outside of Ethan's circle of influence. Someone whose allegiance was to William's legacy, not his greedy successor. George Sterling. I found his number and dialed. This time, there was no preamble. "George," I said the moment he answered, "I need you. This isn't about looking anymore. This is about war." We met again at the Boston Athenaeum. I'd secured a private study on the top floor, a small room with green leather walls and a single table. When George walked in, he saw the change in me immediately. "Good Lord, Caroline," he said, looking me in the eye. "What's happened?" I told him everything. About the horrifying Christmas Eve. About Michael's warning from beyond the grave. By the time I finished, George's stern face was pale. He sat down, looking as if he'd aged 10 years. He'd known Michael since he was a boy running around the office. He'd taught him how to read his first balance sheet. "That lad," he whispered, his voice thick. "That devil's spawn. He killed his own brother. And last night," I said, my voice like steel, "he tried to harm Michael's son, my grandson." The grief on George's face was quickly replaced by a cold fury, a fury I understood completely. "What do we do?" he asked, without a trace of hesitation. "You just tell me." "We're going to expose him, George," I replied. "We're going to use the company against itself. We need a full forensic audit, not a regular audit. I want the best, the real bloodhounds, to turn over every stone, check every transaction, follow every penny." George nodded, his accounting brain already kicking into gear. "That'll send shockwaves. Ethan's the CEO. He'll find a way to block it, or at least control it. Which is why we need the perfect excuse," I said. "A legitimate business reason to conduct such a deep audit that no one can question. A reason Ethan himself will have to publicly support." I paused, looking out the window, where a Hayes Maritime vessel was leaving the port. "We're about to issue a major corporate bond to finance the expansion of the Michael Hayes class of icebreakers." George's eyes lit up. He understood instantly. Of course, any investment bank would demand extensive financial due diligence before underwriting the bond. An independent audit is a standard part of that process. It's perfect. He can't object without making it look like he has something to hide, I continued. He'll have to smile and cooperate, all while we're tightening the noose around his neck. "We need an audit firm with no prior connection to Hayes Maritime," George said. "One that answers only to you. I know a few names." "Get the most ruthless one," I ordered. "I don't want politeness. I want results. And we'll need the legal grounds to push this through," George added. "Ethan will be all over the company bylaws." "Eleanor Portman is working on that," I replied. "But I recall a clause, one that William and I put in years ago, Article 4, Section 2B. The chair of the board has the power to unilaterally call for an independent investigation if there is reason to believe there is executive malfeasance causing material harm to the company's assets or reputation. I think 28 million in embezzled funds and an attempted murder ought to count as reason." George looked at me with a newfound respect in his eyes. "You've thought of everything." "I've had 4 years to drown in grief, George," I said, a bitter edge to my voice. "Now I'm awake. and I am very, very focused. We sat together for another hour, mapping out every step, anticipating Ethan's every reaction, preparing for every contingency. It felt like planning a hostile takeover, but the stakes weren't money. The stakes were justice and survival. When I left the Athenaeum, the sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky a brilliant, bloody red. I felt a bone-deep exhaustion, but beneath it, a resolve as solid as granite. I was no longer a victim of a tragedy. I was now its architect. I called Eleanor as soon as I was in the car. "Eleanor, I need you to draft a board resolution. We're moving forward with the bond issue, and we will be retaining the firm of Deloitte to conduct a full forensic audit as part of the due diligence." Then, I called George. "Contact your partner at Deloitte. Tell him this is a Black Ops mission. They report only to you and to me. I want them to start next Monday." When I got home, the house was lit up. I could see Ethan and Noah in the living room, Ethan showing Noah how to work the new train set. From a distance, they looked like a happy uncle and nephew. But I knew the truth. I was watching a snake play with its prey. Ethan looked up as I entered, a brilliant smile on his face. "There you are, Mother. Look, Noah and I got it working." I smiled back, a smile I had practiced in the mirror. "That's wonderful, darlings." I walked past them and up the stairs, feeling Ethan's eyes follow my every move. The following Monday arrived with a palpable tension, the kind of quiet that precedes a thunderstorm. The Boston sky was gray and heavy, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I had called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. The notice, sent out late Friday, gave only a vague reason: to discuss strategic financing opportunities for future expansion. I knew Ethan had spent the entire weekend trying to figure out the meeting's true purpose. He'd called me several times, his tone oozing concern, asking if there was a problem he should know about beforehand. I'd skillfully deflected, saying they were just some preliminary ideas I wanted to float with the full board. When I walked into the boardroom that morning, the air was thick. The 12 members of the board, the most powerful men and women in New England's maritime and financial sectors, were already seated around the long, polished mahogany table. Ethan sat in the CEO's seat, opposite my chairwoman's position at the head. He looked impeccable as always in a charcoal gray suit, but I could see a faint tightness around his jaw, a sign that he was on edge. I opened the meeting calmly, speaking about the success of the Michael Hayes class of icebreakers and the potential for expansion into new Arctic shipping lanes. I painted an ambitious picture of the future of Hayes Maritime, a future that William and I had once dreamed of. To realize this vision, I concluded, we require a significant capital injection. After consulting with my financial advisors, I believe this is the perfect time to issue a major corporate bond. A murmur went around the table. It was a bold move. "Mother," Ethan spoke up, his voice smooth and respectful, as if he were in full support. "This is a wonderful idea, very bold. But do we need to move so quickly? Perhaps we should form a committee to study the feasibility first." He was trying to stall, trying to regain control. "Time is money, Ethan," I replied, my voice sharp. "The market is favorable now. Delay will only increase the cost of capital. I've already taken the liberty of speaking to several investment banks. They are very optimistic, but they all stressed one thing." I paused, looking at each board member in turn. "They require extensive financial due diligence and a comprehensive independent forensic audit to ensure absolute transparency for investors." I glanced at Ethan. His expression didn't change, but I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped his Mont Blanc pen. "That's a perfectly reasonable request," said Robert Davies, a long-serving board member who I knew was in Ethan's pocket. "But our current auditors, PwC, could handle that expeditiously." "PwC has been our firm for 15 years, I countered immediately. To avoid any potential conflict of interest and to demonstrate maximum transparency, I propose we retain an outside firm, one with no prior ties to Hayes Maritime. I propose Deloitte. A heavy silence filled the room. Deloitte had a reputation for being tough, for being relentless bloodhounds. This was no longer a routine audit. This was an investigation. Ethan knew he was cornered. To object to the audit would make him look like he had something to hide. To support it meant opening his fortress to the enemy. He chose the only path he could. "I agree completely with the chairwoman," he said, a professional smile plastered on his face. "Transparency is paramount. We have nothing to hide. I welcome Deloitte to our company." The resolution passed unanimously. The chessboard was set. The team from Deloitte arrived on Wednesday. They were not your typical auditors in boring suits. They were a 6-person special ops team, led by a woman named Maria Flores, who had eyes like daggers and a firm handshake. They didn't ask for a fancy office. They asked for a secure conference room, unrestricted access to all servers, and complete cooperation from all departments. George Sterling acted as our primary liaison, a special consultant I appointed to facilitate the due diligence process. This allowed him to steer the audit team in the right direction without raising suspicion. The next few days passed in a low, simmering tension. While the auditors dug through the company's guts, I had to maintain a facade of normality at home. I spent my time with Noah, taking him to the New England Aquarium, building Lego castles in the living room. His presence was my anchor, a constant reminder of why I had to win this war. Ethan grew increasingly irritable. His perfect veneer began to crack. He came home late most nights, the faint smell of whiskey on his breath. He became short-tempered with the staff, and even with Noah. One evening, when Noah accidentally spilled a glass of juice on his leather briefcase, Ethan snapped at him with a startling anger, an overreaction that sent Noah bursting into tears. "Ethan!" I had yelled, a grandmother's primal response. He looked startled, as if coming out of a trance. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I'm just stressed from work." He was feeling the pressure. The hounds were closing in on his den. At the end of the second week, George called me on a Saturday night. "They found it, Caroline," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Orion, Poseidon, and Triton. They've followed the money. They aren't just Delaware shell companies. The trail doesn't stop there." "Where does it go?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It's funneled through a series of accounts in the Cayman Islands and ends up in a real estate investment firm in Miami. A company called EH Developments. I'll give you one guess what EH stands for. Ethan Hayes." "But that's not all," George continued. "They found something even better, a $2 million payment made from one of the shell companies that didn't go to Miami. It went into a private trust account, an account belonging to Robert Davies." Boom. There it was, the silver bullet, proof of a bribe to a board member. This wasn't just embezzlement anymore. This was a conspiracy. "Do we have the statements?" I asked. "They have the wire transfers from the Cayman Bank. It's undeniable." I knew it was time. Time to turn a key piece on the board. I asked Robert Davies to meet me the next day, a Sunday, at a private golf club in Brookline where both our families were members. We sat on the terrace overlooking the lush green course, a picture of wealth and privilege. Davies, a man in his 60s with slicked-back silver hair and a country club tan, looked completely at ease. "Caroline," he began genially, "good to see you, but I must admit, I'm a bit curious about this meeting." I didn't waste any time. I placed a slim leather folder on the table, just like the one George had shown me, and opened it. I took out a single sheet of paper and slid it across to him. It was the statement from his trust account, with the $2 million deposit circled in red. The color drained from Davies's tanned face. He stared at the paper, then looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and fear. I don't know what this is," he stammered. "Oh, I think you do, Robert," I said, my voice like ice. "This is the price of your loyalty, $2 million to look the other way, to vote as you're told, to feed Ethan information about the board's private discussions." He tried to regain his composure. "This is a slanderous accusation. I'm calling my lawyer." "Feel free," I replied. "But before you do, let me explain your options. Option 1. You remain loyal to Ethan. And tomorrow, this statement, along with the entire Deloitte investigation, goes to the Department of Justice and the SEC. You'll lose everything, Robert. Your board seat, your reputation, possibly your freedom." I paused, letting the threat sink in. "Option 2, I continued. You tell me everything. You cooperate fully. You write a sworn affidavit detailing how Ethan approached you, what he asked you to do, and how you received the money. In return, I will make sure your cooperation is noted when this all comes out. You'll have to resign, of course, but you might just get to keep your freedom." He looked at me, desperation in his eyes. He was a weak man who had made a mistake out of greed and fear, and I was offering him a way out. "Your father and William were the best of friends," I said, my voice softening slightly for the final blow. They built this company on honor and trust. Don't let his legacy be destroyed by your cowardice. Do the right thing, Robert, for once." He slumped in his chair, his shoulders collapsing in defeat. "He came to me right after Michael died," he began to confess, his voice barely a whisper. "He said he needed an ally on the board, that he had big plans and needed support. I had gambling debts, bad ones. He knew. He offered to help, and in return..." Robert Davies's confession was a sledgehammer to the rotten foundation of the empire Ethan had built. I returned from the golf club with a feeling of cold triumph. I had the financial proof. I had a cooperating witness. I theoretically had enough to oust Ethan in a board meeting, but I knew it wasn't enough. Ethan was cunning and ruthless. When cornered, he would fight dirty. He would try to discredit Davies as a desperate gambler trying to save his own skin. He would claim the entire audit was a witch hunt, orchestrated by a grieving, paranoid mother. He would turn the legal battle into a swamp of delays and counter-accusations. I needed something more. I needed the killing blow, something undeniable, irrefutable, something that had Michael's personal stamp on it. Michael's warning to Sophia echoed in my mind. "He won't stop. He will hunt you down." My son knew his brother better than anyone. He knew Ethan wouldn't just deny the financial crimes. He knew Ethan was capable of much worse to silence his accusers. So Michael must have left something more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. An insurance policy. A final message from the grave. But where was it? For the next few days, while the Deloitte team finalized their report and Eleanor Portman prepared the legal paperwork, I began my own search. A quiet, emotional search. I turned Michael's old home office into my sanctuary and my crime scene. The room had been perfectly preserved for 4 years, a personal museum to a life cut short. The books on maritime history and naval engineering were still neatly on the shelves. The model of the Michael Hayes-class icebreaker sat proudly on the windowsill. The magna cum laude degree from Harvard still hung on the wall. His scent, a mixture of old paper, aftershave, and a hint of coffee, seemed to linger in the air. I started methodically. I went through every desk drawer, every page of his notebooks, hoping for a stray note, a password, a hint. Nothing. Just the day-to-day work of an executive VP, reports, memos, project plans. If Michael had hidden something, it wouldn't be this easy. I checked his computer files. But the computer had been wiped and reconfigured by Ethan shortly after Michael's death, under the guise of corporate security. Any personal data was long gone. Another dead end. I searched the room itself, looking for secret compartments. Behind paintings, under the rug, in the walls. I felt like a thief in my own home, in my own memories. But I found nothing. Despair began to creep in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Michael hadn't had time. Maybe Ethan had found it first. The thought sent a chill down my spine. One rainy afternoon, as I was sitting in Michael's office, on the verge of giving up, Sophia came in. She brought me a cup of tea. Over the past weeks, a subtle shift had occurred in our relationship. The initial fear and suspicion had given way to a reluctant trust, an alliance forged in our shared love for Michael and Noah. "Are you still looking?" she asked gently, placing the tea on a small table next to me. I nodded, too tired to hide my frustration. "I'm certain he left something, Sophia, something definitive, but for the life of me, I can't find it." Sophia looked quietly around the room, her gaze falling on the familiar objects. "He was a very careful man," she said thoughtfully, "but he was also very sentimental. If he hid something important, he wouldn't put it in a place that meant nothing. It would be connected to something, someone he loved." Her words were a spark. I had been searching with the mind of a CEO. I needed to search with the heart of a mother. "Did he ever say anything to you?" I asked. "Any strange phrases? Anything that didn't make sense at the time?" Sophia frowned, searching her memory. "Nothing specific about evidence. He was careful not to put me in danger." She paused, and then her eyes widened. "But there was one thing, something I never really understood." "Tell me," I urged. "It was about a week before he died," she began, her voice trembling at the memory. "He brought Captain Barnaby to my apartment. He said he'd had him repaired a bit because one of the ears was frayed. He'd stitched it himself. He was so meticulous about it. I teased him that he was more careful than a surgeon." She stopped, taking a breath. "When he gave him to me, he said he wanted him to stay with me and the baby, to watch over us, and then he said something strange. He said, "Remember, Soph, the captain's heart holds our compass. It will show our son the way home." The captain's heart holds our compass. The phrase echoed in my head. A compass. Direction. True north. I looked at Sophia, and I knew she was thinking the same thing. Our eyes met in a flash of sudden, brilliant understanding. "Where is Noah?" I asked, my voice urgent. "He's napping in the guest house." "Get Captain Barnaby," I ordered, "now." A few minutes later, Sophia returned, holding the worn teddy bear. The bear I had bought for Michael over 30 years ago. The bear that had witnessed my son's entire life. The bear that was in my grandson's arms on that fateful day in the cemetery. I placed Captain Barnaby on Michael's desk, under the lamplight. Together, we examined him carefully, almost reverently. He was a well-loved toy, his blue fur faded, his little cap crushed. I looked at the ear Sophia had mentioned. Yes, the stitching there was different. Neater, stronger, done with a thread that was a slightly darker shade of blue. A man's repair, not a professional's, but done with the utmost care. I felt along the seams. Nothing. And then, I followed Michael's words. I went to the captain's heart. Under the bear's little uniform jacket, on its chest, was a red felt patch in the shape of a heart. I gently probed the edge of the patch with my fingernail. One side seemed a little looser than the rest. I carefully pulled at it. It wasn't stitched, it was held on with a very thin layer of fabric glue. Underneath the red patch was not the blue fabric of the bear's body. It was a small, hard, black object, nestled cleverly among the cotton stuffing. My heart stopped. I carefully used a small pair of tweezers to extract it. It was a micro USB drive, no bigger than my pinky nail. It was custom made, with no plastic casing, just a thin chip encased in black epoxy. And on the surface of the epoxy, exquisitely laser-etched, was the image of a tiny compass rose. We had found it. "I can't believe it," Sophia whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. It was there the whole time. My hands trembled as I plugged the drive into my laptop. A new drive icon appeared on the screen, but when I clicked it, a window popped up, asking for a password. Of course, Michael would never have made it that simple. "A password," I muttered. "It has to be related to the phrase." We tried everything. Captain's heart, compass, true north. Nothing worked. "It will show our son the way home," Sophia repeated Michael's words. Our son. "Noah. Try something with Noah," I said. We tried his birthday, his name, different variations. Still nothing. The computer warned us we had one final attempt before the drive was permanently locked. We had to think like Michael. Careful, sentimental, meaningful. True north. For Noah, I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place in my head. It's not just a name, it's a promise, a legacy. I typed carefully, one character at a time, saying it out loud as I went. TRUENORTHFORNOAH. I hit enter. For one heart-stopping second, nothing happened. And then, the password window vanished. A folder opened, revealing 2 files inside. The first was an audio file named confrontation.mp3. The second was a PDF document named formom.pdf. With a shaking hand, I moved the cursor to the audio file and double-clicked. The room was silent. And then, the voice of my son, Michael, filled the room from the computer's speakers, as clear and alive as if he were standing right there. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan. $28 million. Do you have any idea what this will do to Mom? You're destroying everything Dad built." Then came Ethan's voice, snarling, distorted with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are, lecturing me? Saint Michael, you were always the golden boy, always the heir apparent, but your time is up." The argument continued, Michael's voice filled with pleading and disappointment, Ethan's growing more vicious and unhinged. And then, Ethan's final words, words that will forever be frozen in my memory. "You're not going to tell her a damn thing, because you're not going to get the chance." The recording ended with a loud crash, as if the phone had been thrown against a wall, followed by silence. Sophia burst into ragged sobs. I sat there, stunned, tears streaming down my own face without my realizing it. I had just heard my son's murder. With a monumental effort, I opened the second file, formom.pdf. It was a letter Michael had written to me. "Dearest Mom, If you are reading this, it means I didn't make it. It means the worst has happened. I am so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I wanted to have undeniable proof before I put this burden on you. Ethan has been embezzling from the company. I found it all, the shell corporations, the wire transfers. It's all in the records that the Deloitte team will undoubtedly find if you point them in the right direction. But it's deeper than money, Mom. There is a darkness in him, a jealousy and a greed that have eaten him up from the inside. When I confronted him, I saw it. I saw he was capable of anything. If something happens to me, please protect Sophia and my son, Noah. The child is innocent, and Sophia is a good woman. I loved her so much. I've left this recording and this letter as a final insurance policy. I hoped you would never need it, but if you do, use it. Don't let him get away with this. Get justice for me. Protect our legacy. I love you. Michael. I closed the laptop. The room was silent again, save for Sophia's crying, but inside of me, there was no more silence. There was only a screaming, raging storm. The final piece of evidence lay in my hands, as heavy as a tombstone. Michael's letter and the recording of his final, fateful confrontation were not just digital files, they were the very soul of my son crying out for justice. The grief inside me swelled, a tidal wave threatening to pull me under, but I refused to let it. Instead, I forged that pain into a blade, cold, sharp, unstoppable. The time for action had come, no more stealthy moves in the shadows. It was time to turn on the lights and let everyone see the monster that had been hiding among us. I spent the next 2 days with Eleanor Portman and George Sterling, preparing for the final battle. We weren't preparing for a meeting, we were preparing for a trial. Eleanor drafted the legal motions. George compiled the final Deloitte report into a presentation that was concise and irrefutable, and I prepared myself to do what no mother should ever have to do, condemn my own son. I chose the battlefield carefully. The Hayes Maritime Boardroom. It was the center of our family's power, the place where his father and I had made the decisions that shaped our empire. It was also the place where Ethan felt most confident, most secure. I wanted to strip that security away from him, in the very place he believed he was king. I called an emergency board meeting for Wednesday morning, citing a single agenda item: presentation of the final results of the forensic audit and discussion of next steps. I knew this notice would land like a death knell for Ethan, but he couldn't run. As CEO, his attendance was mandatory. That morning, as I dressed in my suit, a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that felt like armor, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was no longer Caroline Hayes, the grieving mother. She was Mrs. Hayes, the chairwoman of the board. My eyes were cold and resolved. There was no room for hesitation, no room for weakness. Today, I was justice. When I entered the boardroom, the 11 other board members were already there, sitting in tense silence around the long table. You could have cut the tension with a knife. Everyone knew this was no ordinary meeting. Ethan was the last to enter. He had attempted to maintain his calm facade, but I could see the strain in his walk, the pallor beneath his tan. He gave a stiff nod to the room and took his seat. His eyes avoided mine. He knew. Somehow, he knew his judgment day had arrived. I began the meeting without preamble. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, "we are here today to review the results of the forensic audit conducted by Deloitte. The findings are more disturbing than anything we could have possibly imagined." I signaled to George Sterling. He rose, and on the large screen behind me, the first slide appeared. The Hayes Maritime logo next to the logos of the 3 shell corporations: Orion, Poseidon, Triton. For the next 30 minutes, George systematically, coldly, and precisely laid out the web of fraud Ethan had created. He showed the money flow diagrams, the bank statements from the Cayman Islands, the sham incorporation documents. He exposed how Ethan had exploited Article 7B to siphon $28 million from the company we all loved. The room was filled with a stunned silence. The board members, my friends and colleagues for decades, looked from the screen to Ethan with expressions of disbelief. Ethan sat motionless, his face a stone mask. "This is a gross misunderstanding," he finally said, his voice dangerously even. "These were strategic investments, complex partnerships that an outside firm couldn't possibly understand. This is a personal attack against me, orchestrated by..." Orchestrated by a member of this very board, whom you bribed? I cut him off, my voice like ice. I looked directly at Robert Davies. He went pale, but he held his promise. With a shaky breath, he stood up. What the chairwoman says is true, Davies said, his voice hoarse. I accepted money from Ethan Hayes. In return, I gave him inside information and voted as he directed. I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. A gasp went around the table. Ethan's wall of defense had a massive hole blown through it. You foolish old man, Ethan hissed, his composure finally breaking. You're destroying yourself to save her. No, Ethan, I said, rising from my own chair. He is saving his soul, something you lost a long time ago. I walked slowly around the table, until I was standing directly behind him. This was never just about the $28 million, was it, Ethan? That was just a symptom of a much deeper sickness, a sickness of greed, of jealousy, a sickness that led you to do something far worse than steal. I placed the small digital recorder on the table, right in front of him. Your brother Michael found out. He confronted you. He gave you a chance to do the right thing. I pressed play. Michael's voice flooded the room. You're destroying everything Dad built. Word for word, the final confrontation played out, clear and damning. The entire room held its breath. Ethan's face went from pale to a furious red, and then back to a ghastly white. He stared at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. When Ethan's final words came, "Because you're not going to get the chance," followed by the loud crash, a deathly silence fell over the boardroom. Everyone understood. Everyone knew what they had just heard. They had heard the motive for a murder. "Turn it off," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "Turn it off," he roared, shooting to his feet, his chair crashing backward. He whirled around to face me, his eyes wild and full of hate. The polished veneer was completely gone, leaving only the raw monster. "You chose him," he screamed at me, spittle flying from his lips. "Even in death, you still choose him. The golden boy. It was always him. Dad loved him more. You loved him more. Everything should have been mine. This legacy is mine." He lunged for me, his hands outstretched as if to throttle me. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, staring into the crazed eyes of my son, but he never reached me. The boardroom doors burst open. Two men in suits, whom I recognized as detectives from the Boston Police Department, entered, followed by two uniformed officers. Eleanor Portman had called them the moment the meeting began, just as we had planned. "Ethan Hayes," one of the detectives said, his voice calm and authoritative, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and on suspicion of involvement in the death of Michael Hayes." The officers moved in and cuffed him. He didn't resist. All the fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving an empty shell of a man. As they led him past me, he stopped. "Even now," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom, "you still won't have him back." I looked my son in the eye, for what I knew would be the last time, and spoke a simple truth. "No, but I will have justice for him." As the boardroom doors closed behind Ethan, I felt my knees begin to tremble. I slowly sank into the nearest chair. The rage, the adrenaline, the sheer focus that had sustained me for weeks began to recede, leaving behind a painful, aching emptiness. George Sterling placed a hand on my shoulder. The other board members looked at me with a mixture of pity and awe. I had won, but in that victory was a loss so profound it could never be measured. I had lost both my sons, one to the cold ground of a cemetery, the other, and perhaps this was the greater tragedy, to the weight of his own monstrous crimes. The storm had passed, but the devastation it left in its wake was vast. The weeks and months after that fateful board meeting were a blur of legal proceedings, press conferences, and sensational newspaper headlines. Hayes family tragedy, heir murders brother, shipping magnate exposes son. Every headline was another twist of the knife in a wound that would never truly heal. Ethan, stripped of his polished exterior, fell apart completely. Faced with the irrefutable evidence, the Deloitte report, Davies's testimony, and above all, the sound of his own voice, he accepted a plea bargain to avoid a lengthy public trial and the death penalty. He pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter and multiple financial crimes. The sentence was life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. On the day of his sentencing, he didn't look at me. He was just a stranger, a shadow of the son I had once loved. I felt no hate, no pity. I felt only a profound, endless void. Hayes Maritime was rocked to its core. The scandal sent the stock price plummeting, business partners were shaken, and employee morale was at an all-time low. The board granted me full, interim operational control, and I threw myself into the work of steering the ship through the storm. But work was no longer my salvation, it was just a responsibility. My true salvation, the anchor that kept me from being swept away by the currents of despair, was Noah. While the outside world buzzed with my family's tragedy, my inner world was filled with simple things. Noah's laughter as he played hide-and-seek in the garden, the way he scrunched up his face in concentration as he tried to write his name, his endless questions about dinosaurs and planets. He, in his bright innocence, brought light back into my dark house. He knew nothing of the ghosts that haunted its hallways. To him, this was simply home, where Grandma and Mommy lived, and where Captain Barnaby had a grand garden for his adventures. Sophia changed, too. Freed from the shadow of fear that had loomed over her for 4 years, she began to blossom. She was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than her fragile appearance suggested. She re-enrolled in the master's program she'd been forced to abandon, determined to finish her dream. She was no longer a frightened guest in my home. She was family. We became an odd but unbreakable unit. 2 women and a boy, bound together by the man we had both loved and lost. 6 months after Ethan's conviction, on a brilliant spring morning as the tulips in the garden were in full bloom, I held a press conference at the Hayes Maritime headquarters. I stood before a forest of cameras and microphones, not as a grieving mother, but as the leader of a company seeking a new path forward. Today, I began, my voice clear and strong, marks the end of a painful chapter in the history of Hayes Maritime, but it is also the beginning of a new one. I announced that I would be officially stepping down as chairwoman of the board. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. The legacy of the Hayes family, I continued, cannot and will not be defined by the crimes of one individual. It must be defined by the values my husband, William Hayes, and my son, Michael Hayes, lived and worked for: integrity, innovation, and responsibility. I announced a complete corporate restructuring. The company would be governed by an independent trust, including top industry experts and employee representatives, to ensure that power could never again be so concentrated and abused. George Sterling had agreed to come out of retirement to oversee the transition. And then, I made my final, and most important, announcement. To honor the true legacy of my son, Michael, I said, my voice catching slightly but remaining firm, the Hayes family is establishing the Michael Hayes Maritime Scholarship Fund. With an initial endowment of $50 million, this fund will be dedicated to supporting talented but underprivileged students pursuing careers in maritime studies, engineering, and environmental science. We believe the best way to remember Michael is to invest in the next generation of leaders who will carry on his passion and his vision. And I am incredibly proud to announce, I concluded, looking toward the front row where Sophia was sitting, that the fund's first executive director will be Miss Sophia Rossi. Sophia looked up, a flash of surprise but also immense pride in her eyes. It was a secret I had kept until the last moment. It wasn't charity, it was recognition. She, with her intelligence, compassion, and resilience, was the perfect person to lead Michael's legacy. The press conference ended. A chapter was closed. The final scene of my story doesn't take place in a noisy boardroom or a solemn courtroom. It takes place in the garden of the Hayes estate, a few weeks later, under the golden afternoon sun of late spring. I was sitting on a teak bench, watching Noah. He was nearly 5 now, tall and full of life. He was no longer the timid boy I'd met in the cemetery. He was carefully planting a small oak sapling in a patch of open ground. Sophia, a small trowel in her hand, was showing him how to pat the earth around its base. "What are we doing, Grandma?" he asked me, his cheeks flushed from his work. "We're planting a tree, my love," I replied, smiling, "to celebrate your father's birthday." He nodded seriously, as if it were the most important job in the world. "Did Daddy like oak trees?" "Oh, he loved them," I said, the memory flooding back. "Your father believed that oak trees were symbols of strength and endurance, just like our family. No matter what storms try to knock us down, we will stand firm, and we will grow even taller." Sophia came and sat beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. We watched in shared silence as Noah, the future of the Hayes line, tended to a new life. Captain Barnaby sat on the grass nearby, a loyal sentinel, quietly watching over us all. A reporter once asked me what I wanted my legacy to be. At the time, I had no answer, but now, watching Noah, watching Sophia, watching the young tree reaching for the sun, I knew. A legacy isn't the tall buildings or the giant ships you leave behind, I whispered, more to myself than to Sophia. It's the seeds of love you plant, the truth you stand up for, and the hope you pass on to those who come after you. I had lost the future I thought I had, a future that was mapped out and secure. But from the ashes of tragedy, I had found something far more precious. I had found a new family. I had found forgiveness, not for Ethan, but for myself. And most importantly, I had found a new direction, a new purpose for the rest of my days. Life went on, not in a straight line, but in the spiraling circles of memory and present moments. There were good days, filled with Noah's laughter and the warmth of Sophia's friendship. And there were bad days, when an old song on the radio or a familiar scent would send me tumbling back into the grief, and the hole Michael left behind felt vast and bottomless. On Noah's 6th birthday, we went out to the garden, where the little oak tree we had planted a year earlier was now covered in vibrant green leaves. It was a little taller, a little stronger, just like us. Noah ran to the tree, proudly showing it his new bicycle. Sophia and I watched from a distance. "Do you think he can see us?" Sophia asked quietly, a question we both often wondered. I looked up at the brilliant blue sky of spring. I didn't know the literal answer, but I knew one thing for certain. "I don't know if he can see us, Sophia," I replied, "but I know he is here." I pointed to the oak tree. "He is in the strength of this tree." I pointed toward the Michael Hayes Fund, which had just awarded its 10th scholarship to a brilliant young woman in engineering. "He is in the future of those children." And then I looked at Noah, who was smiling, his face sweaty and joyful in the sunday. And he is right here, in his son's smile, in his kindness and his intelligence. His legacy isn't a memory frozen in the past. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to grow and change the world, one small act at a time. Sophia smiled, a real smile, free of its old sadness. She understood. Later that night, after Noah was asleep, I went to the small observatory William had built in the garden. I opened the dome and pointed the telescope to the night sky. I found the constellation Orion, the hunter, still striding across the Milky Way. And next to it, Sirius, the brightest star, shining as faithfully and unchangingly as ever. I had lost a star, but I had found a whole new constellation. A constellation made of a grandmother, a mother, and a grandson. A small constellation, but one that burned brightly in its own way. I looked up at the stars and whispered into the night. "I'm here, my love. Everything is all right. Your boy is all right, and I finally found my way home." Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt a connection to it, please, you know the drill. Like, share, and subscribe, so we don't miss our next chance to share together. And please, leave a comment below. Your perspective, your story. Let's find that common ground and share it with one another.